I was asked to choose a wife with my eyes closed. Impossible. I chose the alien princess. The coffee in Ambassador Michael Reynolds' hand had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept lifting the cup to his lips anyway, a nervous habit his ex-wife used to tease him about. Through the observation window of his quarters, Earth hung like a blue marble someone had tossed carelessly into the void, and he found himself wondering if this was how astronauts felt before they did something monumentally stupid, awed and terrified in equal measure. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," said Commander Sarah Chen, his chief military liaison, from where she sprawled in one of the chairs that the Andraxians had thoughtfully designed to accommodate human anatomy. Thoughtfully, but not quite accurately, Michael had already discovered that sitting in them for more than 20 minutes made his left leg go numb. "I'm mentally preparing," Michael said, turning away from the window. The Andraxian flagship, the Eternal Radiance, because apparently even their warships needed pretentious names, hummed around them with a sound that wasn't quite mechanical and wasn't quite organic, like a massive creature breathing in its sleep. "You're catastrophizing," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. Look, it's a ceremony. You stand there, you pick someone, you say some words in a language you'll mangle hilariously, and then we all go home with a nice peace treaty and nobody gets vaporized by antimatter torpedoes." "Easy, easy," Michael repeated flatly. "Right, because nothing says easy like a blind lottery where the wrong choice could collapse 3 months of negotiations and potentially start an interstellar incident." Sarah grinned, which made her look younger than her 43 years. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit stressful. Want me to get you something stronger than cold coffee? I'm pretty sure the Andraxians have something that passes for alcohol, though Commander Vex warned me it might make humans see sounds for a few hours." Before Michael could respond, the door chimed, a crystalline sound that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should, like the room was savoring it. The door itself didn't open so much as dissolve temporarily, which Michael still wasn't used to after 3 weeks aboard the ship. The Andraxian attendant who stepped through moved with a peculiar grace that seemed universal to their species, as if gravity was more of a polite suggestion than a law. "Ambassador Reynolds," the attendant said, her long ears tapering to delicate points that swept back from her temples, twitching slightly as she spoke. Her skin held that subtle luminescence Michael had learned to recognize, like someone had mixed starlight into her cells at birth. "The preparation chamber is ready. If you would follow me?" Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah, who gave him an encouraging thumbs up that somehow made him feel worse rather than better. He set down his cold coffee and followed the attendant into the corridor, where the walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns that supposedly indicated the ship's status, but which Michael privately thought looked like someone had let an abstract artist loose with glow-in-the-dark paint. The preparation chamber turned out to be less chamber and more cathedral. The ceiling vaulted upward into shadows that the ambient light didn't quite reach, and the floor was made of something that reflected his image but rippled when he walked across it, like stepping on the surface of a still pond. 3 more attendants waited, and they descended on him with the kind of focused efficiency that made Michael feel like a vintage car being detailed. "The ceremonial robes," one of them explained, holding up a garment that seemed to shift colors as it moved, deep blues bleeding into purples, bleeding into silvers. "They are woven with threads of bioresponsive fiber. They will reflect your emotional state during the ceremony." "Fantastic," Michael muttered, "so everyone will know exactly how terrified I am." "Fear often presents as a deep indigo with flashes of crimson," another attendant offered helpfully. "It's quite striking, actually. Very dramatic." They dressed him with practiced hands, and Michael had to admit, despite his anxiety, that the robes felt incredible, like wearing liquid silk that somehow had weight but no resistance. When he looked at himself in the reflective wall, he barely recognized the figure staring back. He looked like he belonged in an epic space opera, which was either encouraging or deeply ironic given that he'd spent most of his diplomatic career negotiating mining rights and trade agreements. "Your hair," the first attendant said, frowning slightly at his perpetually unruly brown locks. "Perhaps. Leave the hair alone," Michael said quickly. "It's the last piece of dignity I've got." The attendant's long ears flicked in what Michael had learned to recognize as amusement. "As you wish, Ambassador. though dignity and hair are rarely connected in Andraxian philosophy. They led him through more corridors, each more elaborate than the last, until finally they reached a massive set of doors that looked like they'd been carved from a single enormous crystal. Beyond them, Michael could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices, human and Andraxian mingling in a linguistic soup that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "Ambassador," said a new voice, and Michael turned to find High Ritualist Kale approaching. Kale was old, even by Andraxian standards. His luminescent skin dimmed to a soft glow, his long ears marked with ritual scarring that supposedly told his life story if you knew how to read it. "Before you enter, you must understand the weight of what you do. The ceremony of blind faith is not mere theater. It is our oldest tradition for ensuring that alliances are built on truth rather than calculation." "No pressure then," Michael said, and was surprised to see Kale's lips quirk into something almost like a smile. "Pressure is simply potential waiting to be released," Kyle said. "Remember, Ambassador, trust your instincts. They are often wiser than your thoughts." The doors dissolved, and Michael stepped forward into a chamber so vast it seemed to have its own weather system. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. Human diplomats in their formal best-looking, uniformly uncomfortable. Andraxian nobles in robes that made Michael's look plain by comparison, their skin glowing in shades ranging from pale green to deep emerald. At the far end on a raised dais sat Emperor Theron himself, ancient and imposing, watching Michael with eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Michael walked forward, his robes swirling around him, probably broadcasting his terror in high-definition indigo. Somewhere in the crowd he heard Sarah's whispered, "You've got this," which helped approximately not at all. This was it. In a few minutes, he would be blindfolded and asked to choose a bride from 5 women he'd never met, couldn't see, and barely understood. Just another day in the glamorous life of interstellar diplomacy. He reached the center of the chamber and turned to face the assembled witnesses, painting on his best diplomatic smile, the one that had gotten him through trade disputes, territorial arguments, and that one memorable incident with the Centauri ambassador and the unfortunate shellfish. If he could survive that, he could survive this. Probably. Maybe. The High Ritualist stepped forward, holding the ceremonial blindfold, and Michael's last clear thought before everything went dark was that he really should have had something stronger than coffee. The ceremonial blindfold felt like wearing a piece of night itself. Weightless, absolute, somehow both cool and warm against his skin. Michael had expected simple darkness, but this was different. This was the kind of darkness that made him acutely aware of every other sense suddenly amplified to compensate. "The ceremony of blind faith," High Ritualist Kale's voice echoed through the chamber, speaking first in Andraxian, a language that sounded like water over stones, then in English, "has bound our greatest alliances for 7,000 years. Ambassador Michael Reynolds of Earth, you stand before witnesses from 2 worlds. 5 daughters of noble houses have volunteered to participate in this ancient rite. You will choose one, guided not by sight, but by the wisdom that lives beneath conscious thought." Michael heard Sarah cough somewhere in the crowd, probably trying to cover a laugh. Easy for her to find this amusing. She wasn't the one about to play the galaxy's highest stakes game of pin the tail on the diplomatic incident. "The candidate you choose," Kale continued, "will be your companion for the duration of the cultural exchange period. 6 months of shared quarters, shared duties, shared meals. Through this bond, our peoples will learn to understand one another. Choose wisely, Ambassador. Choose truly." "No pressure," Michael muttered under his breath, then realized the acoustics in this cathedral-like space meant everyone probably heard him. Sure enough, a ripple of laughter, mostly from the human delegation, rolled through the chamber. "The candidates will now take their positions," Kyle announced. Michael heard the whisper of fabric, the soft footfalls that seemed to come from directly ahead. 5 distinct presences, he told himself. 5 women, each representing a powerful family. His briefing documents had included detailed dossiers on the likely candidates, complete with political analysis, family connections, and personality assessments compiled by the Intelligence Division. Fat lot of good that did him now, standing here blind as a cavefish. "You may approach, Ambassador," Kale said. Michael took a step forward, then another. The robes swirled around his legs, and he wondered what color they were broadcasting now. Probably something between existential dread and why did I choose this career? The first presence he encountered was to his left. He turned toward her, trying to sense what exactly. The briefings had been frustratingly vague on that point. Trust your instincts, they'd said. Feel the connection, they'd said. Very helpful when you're stumbling around blind in front of several hundred witnesses from two civilizations. He heard her breathing, quick, shallow, controlled. Her stance, even without seeing it, felt rigid, dutiful, like a soldier at attention. There was nothing wrong with that, nothing at all. But something about it made Michael think of contract negotiations, where everyone smiled and nobody meant it. He moved to the second candidate. This one shifted her weight as he approached, a subtle movement that somehow conveyed impatience. Ambition, his instincts whispered. Not the terrible kind necessarily, but the kind that had already calculated exactly what this match would mean for her family's standing. He could almost hear the political gears turning. The third candidate stood perfectly still, but Michael caught a scent, something floral, exotic, deliberately chosen. Too deliberately. Every detail curated, presented, marketed. He felt like he was being sold a product rather than meeting a person. Take your time, Ambassador, Cale's voice floated through the darkness. The truth reveals itself to those patient enough to listen. The fourth candidate's breathing was careful, measured, afraid. Michael felt a pang of sympathy. She was as trapped in this as he was, maybe more so. But fear wasn't a foundation for anything except more fear, and 6 months of that sounded exhausting for both of them. He almost moved on to the fifth candidate but hesitated. Something felt incomplete. He was missing something, approaching this all wrong. He stopped walking, stopped trying so hard to analyze, and just stood there, breathing in the recycled air of the eternal radiance with its faint ozone smell that every spaceship seemed to have regardless of species. That's when he felt it. Not from where the 5 official candidates stood, but slightly off to the side. A presence he'd dismissed as an attendant or observer. Someone not part of the actual ceremony. But now, letting his guard down, letting his diplomat's trained caution slip for just a moment, he felt a warmth emanating from that direction. Not physical warmth. The environmental controls kept everything at a steady 20 degrees Celsius. But something else. A steadiness, a calm center in the storm of political calculation and diplomatic theater. Michael turned toward it, away from the 5 official positions. He heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the crowd. Surprise or scandal, he couldn't tell. He didn't care. For the first time since stepping into this chamber, something felt right rather than merely strategic. He walked toward that presence, his hand extending without conscious decision. His fingers found hers. Cool, delicate, but with surprising strength as they closed around his. The touch sent something like an electric current up his arm, except it was gentler than that, more like coming in from the cold and finding a fire waiting. This one, Michael said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I choose this one. The silence that followed was so profound that Michael wondered if he'd somehow broken the ceremony, violated some rule nobody had mentioned. Then the chamber erupted. Not in applause or celebration, but in a chaos of shocked whispers, exclamations in both languages, and what sounded like someone dropping something made of crystal. The hand in his squeezed tighter, as if its owner was as surprised as everyone else. Well, said a warm voice close to his ear, speaking English with an accent that made the words sound like music. That was unexpected. Did I just make a massive mistake? Michael whispered back. I have absolutely no idea, she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. But it's certainly going to be interesting finding out. High Ritualist Cale's voice cut through the chaos. Ambassador Reynolds has made his choice. As is tradition, the blindfold will now be removed and the chosen one revealed. Cool fingers, not his companions, reached up and untied the ceremonial fabric. Light flooded back into Michael's world, and he blinked against the sudden brightness, his eyes watering. The chamber came back into focus slowly. The vaulted ceiling, the crowd of witnesses still processing what they'd just seen, The 5 official candidates standing in their semicircle, looking various combinations of relieved and offended. And standing before him, still holding his hand, was someone who definitely hadn't been mentioned in any of his briefing documents. She was young, probably close to his own 32 years, if Andraxian aging worked anything like human. Her skin held that characteristic luminescence, a soft green that reminded Michael of spring leaves backlit by morning sun. Silver eyes, wide with surprise, met his. Her long ears, elegantly pointed and adorned with small silver rings, framed a face that managed to be both delicate and strong. She wore robes of deep purple that seemed to contain entire nebulae in their folds. "Oh," Michael said eloquently. "Oh, no." "Oh, yes," she replied. And now he could see the smile to match the voice. "Hello, Ambassador Reynolds. I'm Princess Sarian, the Emperor's youngest daughter, and according to ancient tradition, apparently your future bride." From his throne, Emperor Theron began to laugh. The Emperor's laughter wasn't the polite diplomatic chuckle Michael had grown accustomed to during negotiations. This was genuine, full-bodied, the kind of laugh that made the bioluminescent walls pulse in sympathy. It rolled through the chamber like thunder, and Michael watched as every Andraxian in the room seemed to simultaneously relax and tense up, unsure whether to join in or prepare for catastrophe. "In 3 centuries," Emperor Theron said, rising from his throne with surprising grace for someone who had to be at least 200 years old, "we have performed this ceremony 17 times with representatives from 14 different species. Every single one, Ambassador Reynolds, chose from the 5 official candidates, usually within the first 2 minutes." Michael's diplomatic training kicked in through his shock. "Your Majesty, I apologize if I've caused offense. If the ceremony allows for a second choice—" "Offense?" The Emperor descended the dais steps, his robes trailing behind him like liquid starlight. "My dear Ambassador, you have done the opposite of offense. You have done something none of your predecessors managed. You have actually completed the ceremony." "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's voice carried from the human delegation, apparently past the point of diplomatic restraint. Kale, the high ritualist, stepped forward, and Michael noticed the old Andraxian's ears were vibrating slightly. Suppressed laughter, he realized. "Perhaps," Kale said, "we should explain the full nature of the ceremony of blind faith. It seems our human friends were not given complete information." "You think?" Michael muttered, still holding Princess Sarian's hand, because letting go seemed somehow ruder than continuing to hold it. "The 5 official candidates," the Emperor explained, addressing the entire chamber now, "represent political calculation. Choosing one of them demonstrates that an ambassador can be manipulated by circumstance, can be guided toward predetermined outcomes. It shows that they will make decisions based on what they think they should choose, rather than what they actually feel." Princess Sarian squeezed Michael's hand gently. "I was placed off to the side as the real test," she said softly. "The one choice that makes no political sense. The one that requires actually trusting instinct over strategy." "So this whole thing was a setup," Michael said, then caught himself. "Your Majesty, I mean that with the utmost respect." "It's a setup," the Emperor agreed cheerfully. "A very old, very elaborate setup. And you, Ambassador, are the first to see through it. Or perhaps, more accurately, to feel through it." He turned to address the Andraxian nobles, switching to their language. Michael's translator implant, a tiny piece of tech nestled behind his ear, rendered it as, "Let this be recorded. The humans possess star harmony. The alliance is blessed." The chamber erupted again, but this time in something approaching celebration. The 5 official candidates actually looked relieved, Michael noticed. They'd been as trapped in this as he was. One of them caught his eye and nodded respectfully, her long ears tilted in what his briefing materials had said meant approval. "I have so many questions," Michael said to no one in particular. "Get in line," Sarah called out. "I'm putting in a formal complaint about the intelligence briefing, possibly several complaints." "Ambassador Reynolds," the Emperor said, returning his attention to Michael with eyes that were far too knowing, "you and my daughter will now participate in the bonding walk. It's tradition, much shorter than the ceremony, I promise, and with significantly less chance of interstellar incidents. Though not zero chance," Princess Sarian added helpfully. I should probably mention that. The crowd parted as an attendant approached carrying what looked like a length of silk that shifted through colors even more dramatically than Michael's robes. Cale took it and began wrapping it around Michael's right hand and Syrian's left, binding them together with elaborate knots that formed faster than Michael could follow. The bonding cord, Cale explained, symbolizes the connection formed through choice. You will walk together through the garden of reflection while it remains tied. Consider it your first test of cooperation. How long does that take? Michael asked. Depends on how well you cooperate, Syrian said, her silver eyes glinting with amusement. The record is 8 minutes. The longest was 3 days, but that was between two species who communicated entirely through scent and had very different walking speeds. 3 days. They did not end up signing the alliance, Cale said gravely. A cautionary tale. The crowd formed a loose procession behind them as Syrian led Michael, their bound hands forcing them to walk closer together than diplomatic protocol would normally allow, toward a doorway that dissolved at their approach. Beyond it lay a corridor that opened into something that made Michael's breath catch. The garden of reflection wasn't a garden in any earth sense. It was a vast chamber where the walls, floor, and ceiling were made of something that seemed to be part crystal, part living organism. Structures that might have been trees or sculptures grew from the ground, their branches spreading in fractal patterns that hurt to look at too long. Floating spheres of light drifted through the space like lazy fireflies, and the air smelled of ozone and something sweet Michael couldn't identify. It's beautiful, Michael said, then felt immediately stupid for stating something so obvious. It's a quantum garden, Syrian explained, leading him down a path that appeared beneath their feet as they walked. The structures exist in multiple states simultaneously. What you see depends partly on what you expect to see, partly on your emotional state, and partly on pure chance. No two walks are ever the same. Of course they aren't, Michael said. Why would anything about this process be straightforward? Syrian laughed, a sound like wind chimes. You're taking this remarkably well, Ambassador. Most people in your position would be having some sort of crisis by now. Oh, I'm having a crisis, Michael assured her. I'm just really good at having crises quietly. Diplomat training. We did a whole module on panicking with dignity. They walked in silence for a moment, the bound cord between them warm, where it touched Michael's skin. Behind them, the procession followed at a respectful distance, close enough to observe the tradition, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Can I ask you something? Michael said. You just chose me as your ceremonial bride in front of 2 civilizations. I think questions are allowed. Did you feel it too? What I felt when I was blindfolded? Syrian was quiet for several steps, her long ears tilted forward in what Michael was learning to read as concentration. We call it star harmony, she said finally. It's an old concept. The idea that some souls recognize each other across vast differences, species, time, space, a resonance that defies logic. And you believe in that? I didn't, she admitted. I thought I was just standing there as a test, a prop in my father's elaborate games. Then you turned toward me, and... She paused, and when Michael glanced at her, he saw color rising in her luminescent cheeks, a pale silver blush. I felt like someone had finally turned on a light in a dark room. That's exactly what it was like, Michael said, surprised. Like I could breathe properly for the first time since boarding your ship. Our ship now, Syrian corrected, for the next 6 months anyway, unless you'd like to invoke the clause of mutual disaster and call the whole thing off. There's a provision for that. Takes about 15 forms and a formal apology in 3 languages, but it's possible. Michael considered 6 months sharing quarters with a woman he just met, under constant scrutiny, responsible for proving that humanity and the Andraxian Empire could coexist peacefully. Every action analyzed, every word weighed, every moment documented for posterity. What's the food like on this ship? He asked. Syrian blinked, her silver eyes widening. That's your deciding factor? Food? I'm practical. If I'm going to have a crisis, I might as well have it on a full stomach. She laughed again, and Michael decided he liked that sound. The food is excellent. Our head chef studied on 17 different worlds. Though I should warn you, some of our delicacies are technically still alive when served. Of course they are, Michael sighed. Well, I've made it this far. Might as well see it through. Might as well, Sarian agreed, and squeezed his hand where the cord bound them together. Besides, I'm curious to see if star harmony is real, or if we just both made a very entertaining mistake. For once, Michael said, watching the quantum trees shift and shimmer around them, I'm hoping my instincts were right. The bonding walk concluded after 12 minutes. Respectable, according to Kale, though not record-breaking, and the cord was ceremonially untied by the Emperor himself. Michael's hand felt oddly cold once it was free, which he decided not to analyze too closely. The assembled witnesses dispersed with what seemed like satisfaction, the human delegation looking confused but relieved. The Andraxian nobles engaged in animated conversations that his translator implant couldn't quite keep up with. Ambassador Reynolds will be shown to his new quarters, the Emperor announced, then added with what Michael was starting to recognize as the man's particular brand of mischief, which he will, of course, be sharing with my daughter for the duration of the cultural exchange. Sarah appeared at Michael's elbow so quickly she must have teleported. Shared quarters. Nobody mentioned shared quarters in the briefing. Nobody mentioned a lot of things in the briefing, Michael pointed out. I'm filing so many reports when we get back, Sarah muttered. So many reports, with footnotes and appendices, possibly an index. The quarters are quite spacious, Sarian offered, and designed for dual occupancy with privacy partitions that respond to neural signatures. You won't even know I'm there most of the time. That's somehow less reassuring than you think, Michael said, then caught himself. Your Highness, Princess. I apologize, I don't actually know the proper form of address. Sarian is fine, she said. We're going to be living together for 6 months. Formal titles seem excessive. Her ears twitched in a way Michael was learning meant amusement. Unless you'd prefer I call you Ambassador Reynolds at breakfast every morning? Michael, definitely Michael. Ambassador Reynolds makes me sound like my father, and he was much better at this job than I am. Your father was a diplomat, trade negotiator, specialized in agricultural exports, much lower stakes than potential interstellar incidents. Michael followed as Sarian led him through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves as they walked. He always said that anyone who willingly chose high-level diplomacy had either tremendous courage or terrible judgment. And which do you have? Ask me again in 6 months. The quarters turned out to be less room and more small apartment, multiple chambers arranged around a central living space where the walls displayed what Michael assumed was meant to be a calming view of an Andraxian sunset. 2 moons hung in a lavender sky, and crystalline structures that might have been buildings or mountains caught the light in ways that made them seem to glow from within. The privacy partitions are here and here, Sarian said, gesturing to 2 doorways on opposite sides of the space. They'll seal when you approach them and recognize you're seeking solitude. The ship's AI monitors biosigns. Nothing invasive, just enough to know when you want space. An AI that reads minds. Fantastic. Emotions, not minds. There's a difference. Sarian moved to what appeared to be a food preparation area, though it looked more like a chemistry lab than a kitchen. Are you hungry? The ceremony was 3 hours long. Humans need to eat more frequently than we do, if I remember correctly. You've studied human biology? Michael asked, then winced. Sorry, that sounded accusatory. I just meant I've studied 17 different species biology, Sarian said, her hands moving over controls that made sections of the counter light up in different colors. Comparative xenobiology was my primary field before my father decided I needed to participate in more character-building diplomatic exercises. She made air quotes around the last part, which looked strange with her long fingers. I was 3 years into a research position studying quantum effects on cellular development when he summoned me back for the ceremony. You're a scientist? You sound surprised. No, Michael caught himself before he dug the hole deeper. I assumed princesses mostly did princess things, state functions, ceremonial duties, looking regal. We do those too, Sarian said, but we're not ornamental. Well, my oldest sister Kira might be, but she enjoys it, so that's fine. Something that looked disturbingly like a plant but moved like an animal emerged from an opening in the counter. Sarian picked it up with practiced ease and began doing something to it that Michael tried very hard not to watch too closely. My father believes that royal children should master a practical skill, something that would be useful if, hypothetically, the empire collapsed and we all had to find honest work. Has that ever happened? Twice in the last 5,000 years. Both times the royal family ended up running successful restaurants. We're apparently very good at hospitality when our lives depend on it. A plate materialized, literally materialized, assembled molecule by whatever technology made Andraxian food service work, containing something that looked almost like pasta, if pasta could be multiple colors simultaneously and occasionally shifted position when Michael wasn't looking directly at it. It's safe for human consumption, Sarian assured him. I checked your species' dietary restrictions. No allergens, appropriate protein structure, won't cause hallucinations or temporal displacement. Temporal displacement? There was an incident with the Corellian ambassador. We learned from it. She produced her own plate with something that looked even more alive than Michael's meal. The food is designed to be visually interesting. It's part of Andraxian aesthetic philosophy. Eating should engage all the senses. Michael took a cautious bite. It tasted like something between mushrooms and honey, with an aftertaste of cinnamon. And it was, he had to admit, excellent. This is really good. Don't sound so surprised. We've had 7,000 years to perfect our cuisine. Sarian sat across from him at a table that rose from the floor at their approach. So Michael the ambassador, who has terrible judgment or tremendous courage, what's your actual story? Besides being a diplomat's son who got trapped in a ceremonial marriage by an alien emperor with a twisted sense of humor? That's pretty much the story, Michael said, though I'd add stubborn refusal to accept that I wasn't qualified for the job. My father thought I should stick to trade negotiations like he did. Safe, predictable. Nobody's starting wars over export tariffs, but I wanted to do something bigger. And now you're bound to an alien princess on a ship orbiting your homeworld. Careful what you wish for. Right? Michael laughed, surprising himself. I had this whole vision of dignified diplomatic conferences, carefully worded treaties, maybe a few tense but ultimately productive negotiations. Instead, I got blindfolded and played the galaxy's weirdest dating game. To be fair, Sarian said, her silver eyes sparkling, you won. Most people who play our dating games end up choosing someone their father pre-approved, which defeats the entire purpose. Your father is terrifying, by the way. I don't know if anyone's told you that. Everyone tells me that. He enjoys it. Says it makes the actual diplomacy easier when people are already intimidated. She paused, her long ears tilting forward. Michael, can I ask you something? Given that we're apparently living together now, yes. When you felt that, what did you call it, breathing properly sensation? Was it real, or was it just relief that you'd made any choice at all? Michael set down his fork, the food suddenly forgotten. The question hung between them, genuine and vulnerable in a way he hadn't expected from someone who'd seemed so composed during the ceremony. I don't know, he admitted. I've never believed in fate or destiny or cosmic connections. I'm a diplomat. I believe in clear communication and negotiated solutions and reading the room. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He met her silver eyes across the table. But it was real. Whatever I felt, it was real. Whether it was star harmony or just really good pattern recognition, or my subconscious picking up on something I couldn't articulate, it was real. Does that make sense? More than you know, Sarian said softly. She stood collecting their plates, which dissolved back into the counter when she placed them down. I should let you rest. You've had a very long day of being ritually bound to strangers. Just the one stranger, Michael said. Quality over quantity. She laughed, that wind chime sound that Michael was definitely not getting used to or finding charming. Get some sleep, ambassador with terrible judgment. Tomorrow we start the actual work of proving our civilizations can coexist. Today was just the easy part. That was the easy part? Good night, Michael, Sarian said, moving toward one of the privacy partitions. It dissolved as she approached, then sealed behind her with a soft sound like a sigh. Michael stood alone in the living space, staring at the artificial Andraxian sunset on the walls, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. Then he wondered why he wasn't more worried about it. And then, because he was exhausted and overwhelmed and still processing everything, he started laughing, quiet at first, then louder, until he was sitting on the floor cushion that had appeared beneath him. laughing at the sheer absurdity of his life. From behind her privacy partition, he heard Sarian laugh too, and somehow that made everything seem slightly less impossible. Michael woke to the smell of something burning, which seemed like a bad sign on a spaceship where everything was supposed to be carefully controlled and not on fire. He rolled out of the sleeping platform, which had somehow molded itself to his body during the night in ways that made getting up feel like abandoning a perfect embrace, and stumbled into the main living space. Sarian stood at the food preparation area, waving her hands frantically at a small cloud of purple smoke, while something on the counter made distressed beeping sounds. She'd changed from yesterday's formal robes into something simpler, deep blue that made her green skin seem to glow even brighter. Her long ears were pinned back flat against her head in what Michael was learning to recognize as frustration. "I can explain," she said without turning around. "Does the explanation involve why there's smoke? I was attempting to make human breakfast food, coffee specifically. Your species seems to have a religious devotion to it, so I thought it would be a nice gesture." She turned to face him, and Michael noticed she had what looked like soot on her nose. Apparently, the replicator's human food database is from the 21st century and doesn't account for the fact that coffee beans should not be subjected to plasma-level heat. "You tried to make me coffee and accidentally weaponized it?" "The ship's AI is very apologetic. It's currently recalibrating." Michael couldn't help it. He started laughing. Here was a princess, daughter of an emperor who controlled hundreds of worlds, with a doctorate in xenobiology, defeated by Earth's favorite caffeinated beverage. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me," he said. "Nicest or most destructive?" "Both." He moved to the counter, examining the damage. The replicator had already begun repairing itself, crystalline structures growing to replace whatever had been scorched. "How about I make the coffee and you tell me what's actually on the agenda today? You said yesterday was the easy part." "Right. Today we start the trials of compatibility." Sarian pulled up a holographic display that materialized between them, showing what looked like a schedule dense enough to make Michael's eyes water. 7 different tests over the next week designed to demonstrate that our species can work together, communicate effectively, and resolve conflicts without resorting to violence or prolonged sulking. Prolonged sulking is a diplomatic concern? You'd be surprised. The Vexian delegation once refused to speak to each other for 3 months over a disagreement about proper tentacle grooming etiquette. The alliance collapsed spectacularly. She gestured at the schedule, which expanded to show more detail. "We start with the Chamber of Shared Goals. It's a puzzle room that requires 2 people with different neural architectures to solve. Should take about 4 hours if we're moderately competent. And if we're not, the record is 6 days. But they were from species that communicated through skin color changes and subsonic vibrations, so we should have an advantage." Michael finally got the replicator to produce something approximating coffee, hot, brown, caffeinated, which was all he really needed. He took a grateful sip and felt his brain start functioning properly. What happens if we fail these trials? Then the cultural exchange is considered unsuccessful. The alliance proceeds, but with significantly reduced cooperation, and we both go home having learned that humans and Andraxians are fundamentally incompatible. Sarian's ears drooped slightly. "Also, my father will never let me hear the end of it, and you'll probably be reassigned to negotiating mining rights on some asteroid colony. So, no pressure. Exactly the appropriate amount of pressure." She smiled, and Michael noticed she'd cleaned the soot off her nose at some point. "But I have a theory. Want to hear it? Does it involve more things catching fire?" "Only metaphorically. I think we're going to be fine. Better than fine, actually." She pulled up another display, this one showing brain scan data that made Michael's head hurt to look at. "I ran a quantum resonance analysis last night while you were sleeping." "You scanned my brain while I was sleeping?" "Non-invasively. Very standard procedure. The ship's medical AI does it automatically to monitor crew health." She highlighted something in the data that looked like waves overlapping. "Look at this. Your neural patterns in mind show synchronization in 3 key areas: problem-solving approaches, emotional regulation, and humor response patterns. That's extremely rare between species. Most compatible pairs show maybe one area of alignment. So we're scientifically proven to potentially not hate each other? Essentially, though I prefer to think of it as measurably predisposed to successful cooperation. She closed the displays with a gesture. The point is, whatever you felt during the ceremony, star harmony or pattern recognition or cosmic coincidence, it has a biological basis. Our brains actually work well together. Michael processed this information while drinking more coffee. That's either really reassuring or really creepy. I haven't decided which. Why not both? Sarian moved toward the exit, which dissolved at her approach. Come on, if we're late to the first trial, they'll mark us down for insufficient commitment to cross-cultural cooperation. And I am not starting this process with demerits. The Chamber of Shared Goals turned out to be less chamber and more small arena, with hundreds of witnesses and observation galleries that ring the space above them. Michael spotted Sarah in the human section, giving him an encouraging thumbs up that somehow looked sarcastic. The Emperor sat in the primary observation box, looking far too entertained for Michael's comfort. "Welcome," said an Andraxian administrator whose ears were decorated with so many rings. Michael wondered how she held her head up. "The trial is simple. You will work together to construct a stable quantum bridge between two platforms. Ambassador Reynolds will control the matter stream. Princess Sarian will control the energy flow. The bridge must remain stable for 60 seconds. Simple, Michael muttered. When has anything about this been simple? Sarian whispered back. They took their positions on opposite sides of the chamber. In front of Michael materialized a control panel covered in symbols that looked like someone had mixed ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs with calculus and added some shapes that hurt to look at directly. His translator implant helpfully informed him these were standard Andraxian engineering notation, as if that made it better. Ready? The administrator called. No, Michael and Sarian said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. Begin, the administrator announced, and the trial started whether they were ready or not. Michael stared at the control panel, trying to make sense of the symbols. Matter stream control, the implant translated. Adjust particle density, maintain cohesion, compensate for quantum fluctuations. Right. Simple. He pressed what he hoped was the activation control and watched as a stream of glowing particles began flowing from his platform toward Sarian's. Too dense, Sarian called out. I can't maintain energy flow with that much mass. Reduced by 30%. Michael found what might have been the density control and adjusted it. The stream thinned. Better? Better. Now I need you to introduce a rotation to the particle stream, clockwise from your perspective. How do I? Michael studied the controls, found something that looked like it might control rotation, and activated it. The stream began spinning, but immediately started wobbling. That doesn't look stable. It's not. You're rotating too fast. Slower, and I need to increase energy flow to compensate. Sarian's hands moved over her own controls, and Michael felt something shift in the air. Actual electricity crackling between the two platforms. Good. Now we need to sync our frequencies. On 3, adjust your matter density to match my energy pulse. 1, 2, 3. Michael made the adjustment at the same moment Sarian pulsed her energy flow, and suddenly the stream solidified into something that actually looked like a bridge. Translucent, shimmering, probably completely unstable, but bridge-like. 30 seconds stable, the administrator announced. Continue. Don't celebrate yet, Sarian said through gritted teeth. It's starting to decay. I need more power, but if I add too much, it'll overload my matter stream, Michael finished. What if we pulse it, alternating increases, keeping the average stable but compensating for decay? That might work. You pulse matter density up 10%, I'll pulse energy down 5%. We alternate every 3 seconds? Worth trying. Michael made the adjustment, and Sarian followed suit. The bridge flickered but held, the decay slowing. It's working. Don't jinx it. 45 seconds stable, the administrator called. Almost there, Michael said, then noticed something on his display. Wait, there's a quantum fluctuation building in the center of the bridge. If it hits critical, we both need to pulse together. Same moment, full compensation. It'll either stabilize completely or collapse spectacularly. Sarian met his eyes across the chamber. Trust your instincts? Worked last time. On three? On three. 1, 2, 3. They both made their adjustments simultaneously, and for a heart-stopping moment, the bridge flickered and dimmed. Then it blazed brilliant white, solidifying into something that looked almost real, almost permanent. Michael felt that same sensation from the ceremony, like breathing properly, like something clicking into place. 60 seconds stable, the administrator announced. Trial complete. The bridge will now be stress tested. Wait, what? Michael said, but it was too late. Something heavy dropped onto the bridge from above, and both he and Sarian scrambled to adjust their controls to compensate. The bridge held, and they were both laughing breathlessly by the time the administrator declared them successful. In the observation box, the Emperor was smiling. The remaining trials passed in a blur of increasingly absurd challenges. Navigating a maze that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. Preparing a meal using ingredients from both worlds without poisoning each other. And Michael's personal favorite, the debate of philosophical differences, where he and Sarian had to argue opposite positions on whether consciousness required biological substrate. They'd both gotten so into it that the administrator had to remind them twice that the trial was over and they'd passed 20 minutes ago. 6 days after the ceremony, Michael found himself back in the grand chamber where it had all started, though this time without a blindfold and with significantly less terror. The final trial was called the Revelation of Truth, and nobody would explain what it involved, which Michael found ominous, but at this point unsurprising. Last one, Sarian said, standing beside him. They'd fallen into the habit of standing closer than diplomatic protocol strictly required, shoulders almost touching. After this, we're officially certified as culturally compatible. The Alliance moves forward with full cooperation protocols, and we spend the next 6 months doing actual diplomatic work instead of jumping through ceremonial hoops. I'm almost going to miss the hoops, Michael admitted. They were terrifying, but at least straightforward. Actual diplomacy is mostly paperwork and meetings that could have been emails. We don't have email. We have quantum-entangled thought transfer nodes. Meetings that could have been thought transfers doesn't have the same ring to it. Emperor Theron stood from his throne, and the chamber fell silent. The past week had given Michael enough time around the Emperor to realize the man was far less terrifying than his reputation suggested. He just happened to have the universe's most intimidating resting face and a talent for dramatic timing. Ambassador Reynolds, Princess Sarian, the Emperor said, his voice carrying through the space. You have completed 6 trials. You have demonstrated compatibility in problem-solving, communication, conflict resolution, adaptability, philosophical alignment, and creative cooperation. 1 trial remains. Here it comes, Sarah muttered from the human delegation. She'd been increasingly relaxed as the week progressed, and it became clear Michael wasn't about to cause an interstellar incident. The twist ending. The revelation of truth is the simplest trial, the Emperor continued, and the most difficult. You must each answer 1 question, honestly, before all these witnesses. No diplomacy, no careful wording, no political calculation. Just truth. Michael felt sorry and tense beside him. That's the trial? Questions? The right questions, asked at the right time, reveal everything. The Emperor's eyes fixed on Michael first. Ambassador Reynolds, you chose my daughter during the ceremony of blind faith. You have spent a week living with her, working with her, succeeding and occasionally failing with her. The human delegation departs for Earth tomorrow. You may return with them, leaving Princess Sarian here, and continue the alliance through traditional diplomatic channels. Or you may stay aboard the Eternal Radiance for the full 6-month cultural exchange. The choice is yours, made freely, with no political pressure. What do you choose? The chamber went absolutely silent. Michael felt hundreds of eyes on him, felt the weight of civilizations balanced on his answer. He glanced at Sarah, who was studiously examining the ceiling, clearly refusing to influence his decision. He looked at the Andraxian nobles, many of whom he'd gotten to know over the past week during ceremonial dinners, where the food was occasionally still moving and always delicious. Then he looked at Sarian, whose silver eyes were carefully neutral, her long ears held perfectly still. She wasn't going to make this easier for him. Fair enough, she shouldn't have to. Your Majesty, Michael said, with respect, that's a terrible question. Several people gasped. The Emperor's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? It's a terrible question because it assumes I'm choosing between duty and personal preference, between the responsible choice and the selfish one. Michael took a breath, committed to whatever consequences came next. The truth is, staying isn't selfish. It's not even particularly brave. It's just the obvious choice because somehow, impossibly, I've found someone who makes me laugh when I'm stressed, who understands how I think well enough to finish my sentences, and who tried to weaponize coffee because she wanted to do something nice. Star harmony, neural synchronization, cosmic coincidence. I don't care what we call it. I'm staying because leaving would be the stupidest decision I could possibly make. Sarian's carefully neutral expression cracked into a smile so bright Michael had to resist the urge to shield his eyes. Good answer, the Emperor said, looking satisfied. Princess Sarian, same question, inverted. You may return to your research position, resume your life as it was before the ceremony. The alliance will continue regardless. Or you may stay as Ambassador Reynolds' companion for 6 months of diplomatic work that will be frequently tedious, occasionally dangerous, and probably involve more terrible coffee. What do you choose? Sarian's ears tilted forward, and she didn't hesitate. I choose the terrible coffee. Obviously. She glanced at Michael. My research will still be there in 6 months, possibly longer, knowing academic politics. But this, she gestured between them. Whatever this is, star harmony or synchronized brain patterns, or just really good timing, I want to see where it goes. I want to argue about consciousness and quantum mechanics and whether human food preparation methods are unnecessarily complicated. I want to fail at making breakfast and succeed at building impossible bridges. I want 6 months of figuring out if what we felt in that ceremony was the beginning of something or just a really compelling moment. Also, good answer, the Emperor said. He smiled, which transformed his entire face from intimidating to genuinely warm. Then I declare the trials of compatibility complete. The alliance between Earth and the Andraxian Empire will proceed with full cooperation protocols. Ambassador Reynolds and Princess Sarian are certified as culturally compatible and will serve as living proof that our civilizations can not only coexist, but thrive together. The chamber erupted in applause, actual applause, which apparently translated across species barriers. Sarah was whooping loud enough to be heard over everyone else, and several Andraxian nobles were doing something with their hands that Michael's cultural database informed him was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I can't believe that worked, Michael said to Sarian, as the crowd began to disperse, various dignitaries approaching to offer congratulations. I can, Sarian said. I ran the probability matrices. We had a 73% chance of successful completion. You knew we'd pass and you let me worry all week? Worrying kept you sharp. Also, it was funny watching you stress-eat those phosphorescent bread things at dinner. She took his hand, casual and natural, as if they'd been doing it for years instead of days. Besides, probability matrices can't account for everything. They didn't predict you'd call my father's question terrible to his face. I'm still processing that I did that and didn't get thrown out an airlock. He liked it. Shows backbone. He's been testing you all week. The absurd trials, the increasingly strange food at dinners. That time he casually mentioned the eternal radiance was equipped with weapons capable of atomizing small moons. All tests. The food was a test? Everything is always a test with my father. You'll get used to it. Sarian pulled him toward a quieter corner of the chamber as more well-wishers crowded in. Michael, I need to tell you something before we commit to 6 months of this. That sounds ominous. I'm terrible at sharing living space. I stay up late running experiments. I talk to myself when I'm thinking through problems. And I reorganize shared spaces according to optimal efficiency patterns that nobody else understands. I snore sometimes. I'm obsessive about reading news feeds before bed. And I will absolutely judge you for your music taste even though I have no room to talk because I exclusively listen to classical earth music from the 21st century. We're going to drive each other crazy, aren't we? Almost certainly. Michael squeezed her hand. But I think it'll be the good kind of crazy. The kind where we figure out how to make it work because the alternative is worse. Very diplomatic of you, Ambassador. I have my moments. He looked around the chamber, at the two civilizations mingling together, at Sarah talking animatedly with an Andraxian military officer about tactical approaches to conflict resolution, at the Emperor watching everything with satisfaction. You know what the really weird part is? That you agreed to live on a spaceship for 6 months with someone you met a week ago? That I'm not scared anymore. I was terrified during the ceremony, nervous through the trials, but right now, I'm just excited. When does that happen in diplomacy? When you stop treating it like a negotiation and start treating it like a relationship, Sarian said, which is either very wise or we're both making a huge mistake together. I'm voting for wise. Sounds better. Agreed. Wise it is. She pulled him toward the exit, where the corridor beyond glowed with bioluminescent welcome. Come on. We have 6 months of proving that star harmony is real, or at least that two people from completely different worlds can successfully share a bathroom without starting a war. Now that's romance, Michael said, and followed her into whatever came next, hand in hand with an alien princess on a ship orbiting Earth, having somehow stumbled into exactly where he was supposed to be. His father would say it was terrible judgment. The Emperor would say it was fate. Sarah would probably write 17 reports with appendices. Michael decided he didn't care what anyone called it. Sometimes you chose with your eyes closed and found exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. Sometimes star harmony was real. Sometimes the impossible choice was the right one. And sometimes in the vast space between worlds, you found someone who made weaponized coffee seem like the most romantic gesture in the galaxy. The end.